So we got the Wladimir Klitschko Kubrat Pulev fight taking place tomorrow night. And I'm wondering about Kubrat Pulev's mindset going into this fight, because he's had to endure a lot of shenanigans from Team Klitschko. Even before this fight was signed, he was forced to wait over 2 years as mandatory challenger and fight several eliminators, while guys like Alex Leopai got their mandatory shots immediately. And when he eventually got his shot at Klitschko, Klitschko managed to persuade the IBF to reduce Pulev's purse from 25% to 20%, because normally IBF mandatories get a 25% split of the money and the champion gets 75%. But Klitschko managed to get the IBF to reduce Pulev's purse to 20% and increase his own purse to 80%. That's obviously going to piss Pulev off. And there's a long-standing beef between SAUERLAND, who are Pulev's promoters, and K2 Promotions, which is the Klitschko promotional company. And that is really playing out in the lead up to this fight, because there's been so many shenanigans from the Klitschko fight, from the Klitschko team. Pulev has pointed out the fact that Klitschko has not done any drug testing for this fight, whereas Pulev has been partaking in random drug testing. He says he's been tested 6 times in the past 2 months. Klitschko's not been tested at all. It was the same before the Povetkin fight. Klitschko refused to partake in random drug testing. And this is a guy who likes to present himself as Mr. Squeaky Clean, an ambassador for the sport, and yet he won't even participate in random drug testing. It tells you so much about the real Wladimir Klitschko. Beneath the veneer, beneath this false exterior, he's actually quite a slimy individual. And many fighters have talked about the dirty tactics that Klitschko uses, usually in fight week. He tries to do these dirty things to try and unsettle the opponent and intimidate the opponent before the fight even starts, particularly when it's a big fight. When it's against the Alex Leopais of the world, why does he have to try any shenanigans? He doesn't see Leopai as a threat, so he doesn't really care. But against more dangerous opponents, like David Haye, if you remember, his team deliberately sent David Haye out of the wrong exit to the ring, so he had to go through the crowd, and he was getting cajoled and pushed around and having his feet stepped on and getting spat on and all kinds of stuff. That was done deliberately. He's shown, he pulled out of the first scheduled date with Pulev. That would have messed Pulev up as well and pissed him off even more, on top of the purse being reduced. And he has pulled out of fights with Derek Chisora before, 2 fights. And he was seen just a few days later, after pulling out for the second time. He was seen, and the first time he pulled out, it was the day before the fight. Imagine that. And the second time he pulled out, he was seen just a few days afterwards playing golf, swinging, and it was no problem. He was supposed to have some type of injury in his abdomen, or in his torso, and he was seen playing golf a few days later. People got pictures of him, and then a couple of weeks after that, he signed to fight David Haye. So you really have to question the integrity of Wladimir Klitschko when he says he's injured. And anyway, in this fight week, for the Pulev fight, Pulev's got this drug testing thing on his mind. He's got the fact that his purse was reduced on his mind. And now there's a situation with gloves, because at the public workout, Pulev says he was given gloves that were deliberately too small, that did not fit. That's why Pulev didn't stay long at the public workout. And he says that the gloves they're going to be fighting on the night are custom Klitschko gloves. These are not gloves you can find from normal boxing outlets. They're custom made for Wladimir Klitschko, which is pretty ridiculous. How can gloves that are custom made for Klitschko's hands be then given to the opponent? They're not designed to fit the opponent's hands as comfortably as Klitschko's hands. That's absurd in itself. But what's even worse is that Klitschko is refusing to let Pulev see these gloves until I think the day before or the actual day of the fight itself. That is shocking, because if the gloves he gave him at the public workout, were uncomfortable and too small, then who's to say he won't give him similar gloves on fight night to really hamper his performance? And this is really dirty stuff from Klitschko, but it's nothing less than you can expect from him. He's known for this kind of stuff. Anyone who buys into the squeaky clean image of Wladimir Klitschko is literally living in a fantasy world. This guy really is quite a piece of work in reality. If you remember, before the Chisora-Vitali fight, Wladimir went into Chisora's dressing room to try and unsettle Chisora, complaining about the hand wraps and all that kind of stuff, trying to intimidate him and whatnot. So this is the kind of stuff he does. Pulev is probably going to have to endure even more shenanigans because it's clear it's not just the fact that SAUERLAND and K2 don't like each other, because there's been a beef between them for a long time. But I think also Klitschko and Pulev don't like each other. Klitschko certainly don't like Pulev. And he sees Pulev as a threat, despite what some boxing fans say, because they think that Pulev is shit and it doesn't matter about all these shenanigans because Klitschko's going to win easily anyway. Klitschko's own trainer or assistant trainer, James Ali Bashir, he came out in an interview with Ingram Jones on Bayloric TV, and he said he's worried about this fight. He said he sees this guy Pulev as a genuine threat. He wasn't worried about Leopai. He did an interview before that fight and he said, it's going to be an easy fight for Wladimir. But in this fight with Pulev, he says Pulev's dangerous and he's kind of edgy about the fight. Yes, he thinks Wladimir is going to win. Obviously, he's going to say that, but he admitted that he's quite edgy about it because Pulev is a different animal. There's boxing fans out there saying Pulev is shit, he's got no power, he's basic, this, that, and the other. There are even people I've seen say they would rather see David Haye fight a rematch with Klitschko than Pulev. They think David Haye's got a better chance of beating Klitschko than Pulev has. I wholeheartedly disagree with that. People look at David Haye's power and explosiveness and they forget about the fact, or maybe they don't realize the fact that David Haye is not the most technically sound fighter. It's all good having power and speed, but when you're in there with a big guy who's technically sound, a guy who's much bigger than you like Klitschko, your lack of technique will be exposed. And that's what happened to David Haye in the Wladimir Klitschko fight. Pulev is much better from a technical standpoint than David Haye is in terms of his ability to deal with Wladimir Klitschko. Pulev's going to come in with a jab. Some people say, how can you jab with Klitschko? Klitschko's best weapon is his jab. But just because his own best weapon is his jab, that doesn't mean he knows how to defend against an amazing jab. Klitschko has an amazing jab, but how's he going to defend against an amazing jab? It's two different things. Lennox Lewis also had a great jab. And 3 of his most difficult fights were against Frank Bruno, Vitaly Klitschko, and Ray Mercer. And that was because all 3 of those guys gave him trouble with the jab. So just because a guy has a great jab, it doesn't mean he's going to be able to defend against a great jab. So that's going to be something that Vladimir's never had to deal with before. I just hope that all these shenanigans in the lead up to the fight, with the purse, with the drug testing, with the gloves, all this stuff, and the press conference as well, where Klitschko's team were not, Pulev's team were not allowed into the press conference. I hope all these shenanigans don't throw Kubrat Pulev off and play on his mind too much. I hope that he can still produce his best form in the fight, because he looked in good shape at the weigh-in. He looked in the best shape I've seen him in for a while. Klitschko's always in tremendous shape, obviously. I just hope he can put on his best performance, because then people will see what individuals like me and other boxing fans have been saying for a while, that Pulev is probably the most dangerous fight out there for Klitschko at this particular moment in time. I've always said from the beginning that I favour Klitschko in this fight. If Pulev comes at his best, I would give Pulev a 45% chance of winning. And that's a very high percentage against Wladimir Klitschko. And that means he's got a realistic chance. It still means I favour Klitschko, but it's a realistic chance. And again, if the gloves are not ridiculous, if there's not some serious scandal with the gloves, which you can never put that past Wladimir Klitschko, there could very well be a horrendous scandal with the gloves, even worse than what we saw with Floyd and Maidana. But if there ain't a horrendous scandal with the gloves, and if the gloves are reasonable for Pulev, if they know, because Pulev said that not having access to the gloves means that he and his team don't know how to wrap his hands to fit the specific gloves they're going to be wearing. So if the gloves are not ridiculous and they're comfortable enough for Pulev and they're not, ridiculously padded or whatever, and all this stuff in the lead up to the fight, if Pulev's able to just keep it down, the same way Derek Chisora did against Vitaly, he was able to put all the shenanigans outside the ring aside and still produce one of his best performances. Even though he lost, he wasn't expected to do as well as he did against Vitaly Klitschko. So if Pulev can do something similar, put all that stuff aside and the gloves are okay, then you can expect to see Wladimir Klitschko have one of the toughest fights of his career. And if that was the case, I would give Pulev a better chance of beating Wladimir than David Haye, because he's much bigger, he's physically stronger, and he's going to fight a different kind of fight than David Haye. He's going to try and impose his boxing on Klitschko, whereas David Haye tried to run around and rush in with a right hand. Pulev ain't going to do that. Pulev's going to try and impose his boxing. It's going to be a technical fight. It's not going to be a brawl. But Pulev is going to try and impose that jab on Klitschko the same way Klitschko is going to try and impose his jab on Pulev. Going to be an interesting fight. Looking forward to it. These two guys don't like each other. These two promotional outfits don't like each other. There's a lot of bad blood. There's been a lot of shenanigans in the lead up to this fight, even before the fight was signed, where Pulev was made to wait 2 years, which is disgusting, before he got his shot. And it shows you how much influence Klitschko has over the IBF. The fact that this guy had to wait over 2 years and the Sauerlands had to put a tremendous amount of pressure on the IBF to actually make the fight go ahead. And even then, Pulev's purse ended up being reduced. Just shows how much power he has over the IBF, and the rest of the sanctioning bodies is no different. So anyway, I'm looking forward to the fight. Let me know what you think is going to happen. Let me know what you make of all the shenanigans. And drop your comments below. This is Hatman. I'm out.